moving on to research papers, the next one of which is Cherie from Water and Music. Who's going to talk about AI attribution, music attribution. So I'll hand you over to Cherie.
Thank you so much, Tim. And hi, everyone. It's been really great to listen in on today's talks and presentations. It's a very good mix of kind of more the artistic creative side and also the industry side. The set mixer presentation was super interesting. That is definitely like the area I sit kind of at the intersection of all those places. So as a brief introduction, I'm Cherie Hu. I'm the founder of Water and Music, which is a music and tech research and consulting firm. I have been running it full-time for the last 5 years, and prior to that was a freelance analyst for the likes of Billboard, Music Business Worldwide, Forbes, Variety, and many other publications. Over the past decade, I've just been really interested in how technology is impacting the entire value chain of music, from not just creation and production, but also to how it's distributed, monetized, and then experienced by consumers and fans. So obviously AI is impacting the entire kind of spectrum of that chain. And I think we're also in a really interesting time right now where I would argue that the state-of-the-art generative music AI models are making music that is on par with what humans can make. We can definitely debate that or kind of talk about that in the chat maybe at a later point, but I think in terms of quality, we're at that point now. So across the industry, I think the next question is, how do we actually make money from that? What happens to all the artists, producers, songwriters, creators who are already, you can stay on the second slide, thank you, who are, who made all the music that is training these models? Is there any opportunity for credit and compensation when their work is used to train AI models, and then when that output is then monetized, generating hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of streams or views? So this presentation is also, I should mention, you can treat it as like a preview of a much, much deeper report that we published on Water and Music. It's already on our website. It was published last month on music AI attribution and kind of how it really works on a technical level. I won't go too deep into the technicalities today. I'll kind of focus on some high-level fundamental truths or questions around this space. So this is the main question to keep in mind in terms of why we're talking about it. It's about this question of who deserves credit and compensation when AI generates music. Next slide. So today I'm going to, again, do a very quick speed run of the structure of our report. So attribution, which I'll define on the next slide, is kind of the underpinning concept that enables credit and compensation in an AI world for music. Myself and my research team kind of went through some very fundamental questions. What is attribution? What are we actually attributing from the training data? How does it work on a technical level? Who are the main players in this space? And then what does this all mean for the music industry, from individual creators, artists, producers, to bigger rights organizations as well? Next slide. So in terms of how we define attribution, I think it helps also by comparing it to what it is not. So with things like Content ID on YouTube, which probably many of you are familiar with, that is what I would call similarity search. So, you're kind of, it involves fingerprinting a lot of the time. You take, one song or sample, compare it to another song or sample, and see on the output level, how similar the two are. If they're super similar or maybe identical, that, kind of leads down the whole Content ID chain of placing a claim, claiming something is infringing, et cetera. Attribution goes much deeper into understanding, in the context of AI, the actual internal mechanics of how the AI model works. So unlike something like similarity search or deepfake detection that is just looking at comparing outputs and how similar or identical they are. Attribution is actually trying to causally link outputs back to the specific training inputs that influence them. So the ideal, I think, for the music industry is that if, say, ChatGPT has a music generator at some point in the future, generates a song, and then the output is like a royalty sheet with the splits of each individual pieces of training data that influence that output, maybe even with kind of percentages of influence. So when we talk about attribution, we're kind of talking about that internal level of influence, not just comparing outputs. Next. What makes this topic really complicated, and I think also a very important fundamental truth to address here, is that generative AI is not the same as sampling. It is a lot more complicated. And maybe this is already like a widely known thing, but I think it's worth visualizing why it's so different. So traditional sampling, again, is just taking fragments from existing recordings and manipulating them in some way. Like the funky drummer, iconic drum break, kind of that's a very recognizable sample across, at this point, hundreds of songs. In contrast, AI models are not directly taking fragments from training data and copying them in outputs. They are absorbing, rather, these aesthetic and musical concepts on a much more abstract level. And they learn patterns and concepts rather than merely copying sections. So I think a good example with songwriting is it might learn the concept of a 1-5-6-4 chord progression. Hopefully that makes sense to this audience. Obviously, there's so many songs that use that concept. You can't, and if we tried to equally attribute it to all the songs that include that chord progression, you would have probably hundreds of thousands of tracks, and it wouldn't be practical, and it's not really like, and it's a high level concept at the end of the day, and not something that any one particular creator owns, so to speak. So, and they're kind of learning these concepts, and it's captured, as this image on the right shows, across these multi-layered architectures. This is what the core of deep learning is all about. So a single AI generated track from some music generator like Suno will draw from dozens of different abstract layers of influence. So this image already is very complicated and is still an oversimplification of what is actually happening under these models. And there's been millions of dollars poured into this field of research, and people still haven't fully figured it out in terms of how to actually interpret and explain what's happening internally. Next. Now for the question on what we can attribute. I think this is another layer of complexity on top of just the core model architecture of how AI models work. So in the music industry, the default that we think of is you can attribute the composition of the underlying training data. You can attribute the recording. And actually, a lot of AI models are trained on recordings, so they don't actually have the composition information. And so a lot of songwriters, I think, are arguably kind of left out of a lot of the training data conversations that are happening right now. But beyond just the music, beyond just the audio, there's so many other inputs. There's the prompt. I think the US Copyright Office technically has declared that if you prompt something like a Suno and just take that song that is generated as the output, that is not copyrightable. But undeniably, the user had some creative influence over the output through the prompt. So should they be attributed as well? Yeah, I won't go into kind of other like sources or other techniques that also might muddy that influence. But attribution is so complicated. AI models are so complicated that all the solutions that are out there right now ultimately make a trade-off and a value judgment about which of these elements do or don't deserve compensation. So the example of like AI models that primarily train on recordings, their attribution tech is mainly attributing to the recording side and not to the composition side, just because they don't have that data a lot of the time. So just also keeping that in mind, like these technical limitations are shaping ultimately how value is going to flow. through the system. Next. Yeah, I won't go through these in too much detail. I can also probably distribute this report to this group after the fact if there's any interest. But we scanned like dozens of academic papers on attribution, primarily from the LLM world, where I think there's the most activity in this space. There isn't as much yet in audio, but I think that will change very soon. And pulled out these three main techniques. One is called an influence function. The concept of like a line of best fit, I think, is the most simplified illustration of this in terms of, you know, understanding how does taking a certain data point out of the training data change the model output. I think it's super limited because it's really sensitive to outliers. And if you try to implement that at scale, if you're training on, you know, terabytes of data, it's just not practical to really go with that. Embeddings may be familiar to some more technical people in this group. It's kind of mapping and compressing audio data into numerical coordinates. It's also very limited because it doesn't really show causation or direct influence. It only kind of clusters similar audio based on the output in kind of a cluster of space. And then watermarking, which is already very popular in music, that kind of takes these detectable tags from training data. It could be metadata. This screenshot is very notorious from the Doom video game soundtrack. For one of their songs, they embedded this like 666 watermark in their music, which is kind of very humorous on theme. But again, also very limited because it's just showing that the training data was in the output. It doesn't actually show the degree of influence. So general takeaway from this slide is that the perfect attribution system does not exist. And I think any conversation around compensation and credit in a music AI world has to start from this point. Even with the state-of-the-art AI models, it's still very limited in what they can do. Next, how am I doing on time? Do I have like 1 minute, 2 minutes?
The last minute, yeah, please.
Last minute, okay. I'll be very quick. So yeah, there are several startups that are acting as brokers essentially between rights holders and developers to close this new generation of licensing deals. These are definitely the companies to know about. I would call out Surreal as one of the only companies that I believe has a public patent around attribution and measuring influence. So I would definitely recommend looking into them. We link to the patent in our report as well. And if you go to the next slide, which should be one of the final slides, just some like strategic takeaways for the industry. Even though perfect attribution doesn't currently exist, also one phrase that I've been throwing around is that the perfect attribution system is the one that the industry will agree to use. Like if you have perfect attribution, but it's really cumbersome or impractical to implement, or not everyone in the industry thinks that it is fair, I think that, you know, it's kind of useless practically at that point. So there's a big like market coordination problem in terms of getting all the rights holders to agree to use these emerging systems. And because of that, artists, producers, creators that own all of their rights actually have a huge advantage when it comes to licensing deals. And so a lot of the artists that we're seeing actually like earn revenue from these deals are fully independent, own all of their rights, are kind of running their own ship. So just, I guess, keeping that in mind in terms of like who has the most leverage in this world. I will stop there because I know that I think I'm at time. But yeah, thanks for listening to my talk. Thank you to everyone here for having me. And yeah, I believe our report was linked in the chat, but I'm happy to send a PDF as well to everyone here.
Thank you, Cherie. That's excellent.